Hey everyone, welcome to SingularityComputers Client Build 17 Part 1. This is going to be another MITx build and it's going into the Caselabs Mercury S3. It's going to be a theme build which I'll talk about shortly. It's going to involve custom cables, custom paint and airbrushing. Starting with an overview of the components, we have the Asus Maximus 7 Impact, 16 GB of Corsair Dominator Platinum, the Intel Core i7 4790K, the Crucial M550 512GB M.2 SSD, a Western Digital Black 4TB hard drive, the NVIDIA GTX 980, which is actually going to be upgraded to the Titan X, and a Corsair AX760i. For the water cooling components, we have Noise Blocker Black Silent Pro PL2s, which are actually going to be changed to 140mm fans because we're using 280mm radiators in this build. We have the Bitspower Upgrade Kit 150 in acrylic, the Bitspower Acrylic DDC top, the Bitspower DDC cooler in black, Swiftech MCP35X, two Black Ice Nemesis 280mm radiators, the GTX and GTS, two bottles of Mayhem's Pastel Red Coolant Concentrate, which are going to be changed to Mayhem's X1 UV Red, and a couple of EK Nickel Plexi CSQ water blocks, one for the graphics card, also with a backplate, and a full water block for the motherboard and CPU. The custom paint is now complete. As you can see, this build has a Star Wars Sith theme, so the color scheme is obviously black and red. Now I'm disappointed that I was unable to show the process of painting this case. I've always tried to show as much of the process of my builds as possible, particularly modding. But I'm currently in the process of expanding SingularityComputers and setting up a new workshop, and we just didn't yet have the capabilities to film in the new workshop all the time. But I'm about to take it a whole lot further because with all of the new tools, capabilities, equipment, I now have GoPros set up around the new workshop to capture everything that happens, every angle. Not only that, the new employees, because I now have a cameraman employed full-time whose only job is to film everything that happens in the workshop. So starting soon, you are not going to miss a thing, and we are going to be getting some incredible footage because, you know, with the tools that we now have in action, you know, it's going to certainly make for some amazing videos. Also, the airbrushing, you know, capturing the airbrushing being done by the incredible painter that I have, all of that starting very soon. And right now, a couple of my employees are working for the last 7 days, 16 hours a day. They're hardly sleeping, they're totally burned out. They're trying to get the workshop complete so that we can get it all up and running. So that's just the way we do things. Anyone who's done a little bit of painting will know that a high gloss black like this, perfect liquid mirror finish, I mean, on a car where there's nice big open panels, it's a lot easier, but with all these angles and perforations and separate panels, it is difficult to get a perfect uniform finish. And it took a lot of time and effort. You know, it needs to be buffed and polished. Not only that, you cannot get away with anything on a gloss black finish because even the slightest imperfections show up and you can see them from a mile away. And I know people who skip through my videos are going to complain about the particles on the surface. Well, they're on the surface, they're not under the paint. And they're just specks of dust that have landed while I've been filming. And it just goes to show that this paint job, you know, it shows up everything, even the slightest imperfection. The art has been done with a candy red, so it's a semi-transparent paint. And the reason we did it this way is because the client requested very subtle art, and I know it doesn't look subtle in the video and photos, but that's because to film and photograph the case I'd have to shine a lot of light on it, and when you shine a lot of light on the candy it really pops out and shows up. But in normal light, as you walk around the build, the art actually disappears and then pops out again depending on the light and the angle you're looking at the build from. But this was just very difficult to capture with the cameras that I currently have because the reflection, you know, the cameras want to pick up the reflection instead of the art underneath it. But you know, in real life, the art is extremely subtle, and using candies is a great way to achieve that. I'm now going to start installing components, and I'm going to start with the power supply, radiators, and fans. You can fit two 280mm radiators into the Caselabs Mercury S3, as long as you use the raised top panel, instead of just the standard top panel. I'm going to be installing the Black Ice Nemesis 280mm radiator, but two different versions, the GTS and the GTX. And the reason I'm installing two different versions is because if you are going to install two 280mm radiators into this case, one can be basically any thickness, but the other one has to be 30mm thick. It can't be any bigger. And you'll see why shortly. It's just not going to fit. So that's the difference between the GTX and the GTS from Black Ice. One is 54mm thick, the other is 30mm thick. There's a number of reasons I prefer Black Ice radiators. One is because they're made from all copper and brass, and there's no other company doing this that I know of. Usually the outer panels are steel. Also, the different thicknesses are just perfect. If you want a smaller radiator, you can grab the 30mm thick, and there's not much point in going over 60mm, so Black Ice has a nice balance at 54mm. Also, their balance of the radiator thickness to the fins, because if you're going to go for a 30mm thick radiator, you're going to get a bit of a performance loss, but Black Ice makes up for this with their fin arrays. They have incredibly dense fin arrays on some of their radiators. Also, this one here, you can see the dual rows of fins compared to a single row of fins basically means double the surface area, so a lot more performance. Not only that, Black Ice uses thinner fins at 25nm compared to the usual 40. And you wouldn't think this would make much of a difference, but if you compare them, you can see it. It means more airflow and better heat dissipation due to the thinner material. The radiators are also incredibly compact. They fit anywhere, nice small end tanks. If you're going to go for the GTS, the 30mm thick radiator, they fit just about anywhere. They're a perfect compact radiator. And, you know, the performance of their radiators and the quality is excellent. So I've been using them for many years now. The fans I'm using in this build are Be Quiet Pure Wings 2 140mm fans. And the reason I went for these fans is because in a build like this, there's no fan control. It's a small form factor build, but I have plenty of radiator capacity. So what I prefer to do is get very quiet fans, low RPM that don't move much air, because you can get away with that when you've got enough radiator capacity. You still get plenty of performance, and that way you don't have to worry about fan control. It's going to be very quiet, so you know, it's a perfect configuration for this build. Now you can see that I've actually cut the connectors off. This is what I do when I'm going to modify the cables. I'm going to modify the length of the cables and sleeve them, but I can't finish doing that until the fans are actually installed. So for now, I cut the connectors off and sleeve the cables, and then I adjust the length later. So the specifications of these fans is 1000 RPM, 18.8 decibels, 61.2 CFM, and 0.76 millimeters H2O. You can see that I've installed the front radiator, and I've installed the GTX there, the thicker radiator. So the GTS, the thinner radiator, will go at the top. I've also installed the power supply, and I have the rest of the components laid out here ready to go. Looking at the memory, you can see that it runs at 1866 MHz C9. Using a SATA M.2 SSD in this build is just going to be perfect. I mean, this is a great case. There's plenty of places to install SSDs. You can install them under the motherboard tray and have them hidden away, and you can hide SSDs anywhere, and you know, install them just about anywhere. But the thing is the extra cables. It means a lot of extra cable mess, and to have an incredibly clean build, a SATA M.2 SSD is just excellent, and the performance of some of these now is incredible. I'm looking forward to getting my hands on a Samsung SM951. I have a couple of builds coming up where I might be installing a few of those actually. I've installed the CPU, and the next step now is to install the motherboard and graphics card water blocks, and also prepare the water cooling components. This is actually the first time I've laid hands on a monoblock. Bitspower was the first to release one for the Asus Maximus 6 Impact, and EK soon followed. And now both Bitspower and EK have a large range of different monoblocks, not just for ITX motherboards, but also for full-size boards, ATX and EATX. And this was really the logical next step to take for ITX motherboards, and it really started with the Maximus Impact because it was the first motherboard that pushed the limits with overclocking and features, and there was demand for water cooling. And for an ITX motherboard, this is really the only way to water cool the MOSFETs, the CPU, and the IMC. So that's what this water block does, 3 heat generating components in one. So I think it's an incredible idea also for full-sized motherboards. I mean, obviously with ITX motherboards, it's really the only way to go, but for full-size boards, there's a number of different benefits that come from using a monoblock. There is the obvious drawback of having to remove the entire block to change the CPU, but I think the benefits outweigh this. First of all, the aesthetics, having an amazing looking block and increasing the size of it. Also, it's a lot cleaner. Instead of having 3 separate inlets and outlets, you have a single inlet and outlet. So obviously a lot less fittings and tubing and mess. This also increases performance due to the increase in flow. And there's also the possibility, depending on the design of the water block, of improving the performance of the block. There's a lot of different things you could do with the design due to the size of it. And, you know, it just brings a lot of ideas to mind. And if you take a look at the design of this water block, at first glance it looks like it's in parallel. But then you realize there's actually different levels in it. It's been very well thought out and designed. So I think, you know, it's a small change in water cooling, but any small change, you know, any advance I get excited about, because there's a lot of things that we've been doing the same way for a long time. And I really think that it's about time we started thinking outside of the box, doing things differently. And, you know, I just have so many ideas I have for a long time. And, you know, that's what I plan on bringing. And I'm currently working on a number of different components, including cases, and water blocks are definitely on my list. So I've now installed the water blocks, and I'm now moving on to preparing the water cooling components, the pump and reservoir configuration. So what I have here is a Swiftech MCP35X, but for this you can use any DDC form factor pump. And I'm removing the stock casing and the stock pump top, and actually removing the pump itself, you know, entirely out of it. You can see the pump here. I'm now installing the new Bitspower casing that actually comes with the Bitspower DDC heatsink kit. You can get it in a whole range of different colors. And just make sure you follow the instructions carefully, mainly with this part of it, because you need to install the thermal interface material. And you also need to install these little sections of double-sided tape or plastic, just in case, you know, the metal part makes contact. So once you've done that, you can hold all of that together, and you actually need to hold the bottom 2 sections together, the cover and the heatsink on the bottom, and also the pump top, while you screw it all together. And this is the Bitspower acrylic DDC top. You can also get this in acetal. And then the reservoir screws down onto the top, as you can see. And you're actually better off removing the reservoir tube from the top, the upgrade kit, whether you get the 150, the 250, there's a number of different sizes to choose from, while you are bolting it together. Otherwise you will end up scratching the reservoir tube. You need to be very careful of that. Don't over tighten it too much, otherwise you are going to have problems with your pump. And that's it. It's a nice compact configuration. It's now time for me to install the pump and res config. Now, normally if I was modding this case, I would just bolt this particular config straight to the bottom of the case. That's the great thing about this Bitspower DDC cooler. The black component you can see on the bottom of the config, it has a number of M4 threads on the bottom of it. So it's perfect for mounting this config. But because this case is remaining stock standard, I'm not going to be doing any mods. I have another technique in mind. And this is actually a great way of mounting a pump and res config if you want to do it quickly and easily without any mods. It's the way I used to do things. You know, I haven't actually done it in a long time. So UN mounts, these come in 120mm and 140mm. I'm using the 140mm mounts because I'm using 280mm radiators. So you can see how the config works. I have two UN mounts bolted onto the radiator, which then allows me to install the bits power plastic 60mm res mounts onto the UN mounts and fit the pump and res config into position. There is one serious problem with this config though, and that is that the plastic bits power res mounts don't have enough grip. The config slides straight through them. It doesn't matter how tight you do them up. And the other thing is they scratch and scuff the res tube, so you need to be careful of that. Now there's a number of ways to work with this problem, and you can see what I've done here. I've actually used the fittings to prevent the pump and res config from sliding up and down inside of the mounts. But I mean, the best way of doing things is just to mill up some billet aluminium mounts, anodize them, design them properly, put some rubber around the inside to stop it from sliding around, and that is something you're going to see from me shortly. So you can see that I've started on the fittings, the motherboard is installed, pump and res config is installed, and I've also just installed the top radiator. The reason I waited until now is because I wanted the top panel off so that I could easily get my hands in to install all of the internal components. So now that the bulk of those components are installed, I've installed the top panel, radiator and fans. And you can see what I mean about these radiators fit perfectly. There's a 5mm gap there between the top of the front radiator and the top radiator. And due to how compact black ice radiators are, you can see that very tiny end tank. This is possible. A lot of other radiators have massive end tanks, and you know, you can see that end tank is about 5mm high. So if it was much bigger, this wouldn't have been possible, the installation of two 280mm radiators. You can also see what I mean about how the front radiator really could be any thickness, because it can just fit in underneath the top radiator. Radiator thicknesses again are 30mm thick for the top one, 54mm thick for the front radiator. So looking from around the other side of the build, you can see that I've also started on the custom wiring. I've wired up all of the fans, and I've wired them up to a Mod My Toys splitter, which actually goes from Molex to 5 3-pin fans. And I've installed it right up between the two radiators in the corner so you can hardly see it. It's a perfect position for it in this build. Now I did install the graphics card water block and backplate, and I did have it installed, but that was the GTX 980. As I mentioned, the client has decided to upgrade to the Titan X. So the Titan X will arrive in time for the next part of the build log. That sums up this video. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, like and favorite if you want to see more.